Awesome.
So let's wait a minute for everyone to come in and watch.
Oh my goodness, I got a notification that we're live.
Wow!
Oh, Tubes, if you could tag everyone in the Discord and let them know that we're going to be talking about Zelda. We're having class. I'm literally teaching you guys about what could have been. But while we get started,
another hour and a half lecture.
While we get started, it's really good that Zelda never released, because if it would have, we would have never gotten Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, maybe Skyward Sword, but yeah, like none of those amazing games would have ever released, because Majora's Mask released because they had all the stuff left over from Zelda, and they wanted to reuse it. And then Wind Waker came, and it was all cartoony because they were tired of the Ocarina of Time art style, and they wanted something new and different, to where if they wouldn't have made Majora's Mask and they would have just released Zelda, they wouldn't have been tired. And then it would have just been like an enhanced graphic style of Ocarina of Time. And the only reason Twilight Princess exists is because they made Wind Waker, and everyone complained that it was too cartoony. So literally every single Zelda game after would have been completely different.
Or it might have just changed up the order, because I mean, if we just swapped the placements of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, then that'd be the burnt out stage where they did Twilight Princess, and it's just like, okay, well, we can't do this anymore. We want to do it for a different style. So then cartoony is next gen console.
Yeah, but like the story of them, like they would have maybe have gotten to those art styles eventually, but the stories themselves would have been different.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Something that's also really confusing is Wind Waker, at the very end of it, has a quote, or it references something from Majora's Mask, but they're in two different timelines. But when it was made, Wind Waker just took place like after Majora's Mask. So that's another crazy thing. Okay, we got 23 people watching on the YouTube. No one cares about Twitter.
I'm just busy sending out some messages, doing the heckin' share. And have you posted to Twitter?
Nope.
Oh yeah, I guess I should post it to Twitter. Alright, we're gonna get started in a minute, folks. Welcome to Zelda School, the Skyloft Academy, right?
With your host, Game Over Jesse.
And his, 5 other co-hosts.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And we are the Ginyu Force.
We really are the Ginyu Force. We did the pose at E3.
We did do the pose.
I want to do the pose.
I was very, very much not there.
I was for Coob.
Wait, where's
Maybe
Gibbs
I'll
at?
join in this time.
He's in the chat.
I don't think he was joining though.
Yeah, he wasn't gonna join, I don't think.
Okay.
So he's modding for us.
But he does want to join you for your Dragon Ball chat, so don't forget about it.
Okay.
I'd also like to join in for Dragon Ball chat.
I would,
but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah,
I would, but I haven't followed it, so I was like...
Is it bad that most of the stuff I know about Dragon Ball is from Dragon Ball Z Abridged and Dragon Ball Fighters?
You know what? That's not the worst thing.
It's not the worst.
Hello? My thing isn't letting me copy and paste.
Oh boy.
I just want to put the link for the video in here. Why are you being like that? What have I done?
Alright. You are all tagged on Z Twitters.
Okay. Yeah, it's Twitter.
Almost. I still have to post it.
Boo.
YouTube.com/game over Jesse /live. That's so ignorant. Why couldn't I get a shorter username?
Yeah, Game Over Jesse.
Shorten it to Go Jesse. Geo Jesse.
Mention Jesse. Just got the Twitter.
31 people watching us talk about nothing. Okay, are we ready, guys? We're ready?
Yeah, let's do
The
it.
stream's
Are we
going
ready?
good. The recording's good. Everything's good.
I'm-
Okay.
And now for Jesse's least favorite part.
No, I don't have to do the intro. This isn't the podcast. So
This isn't
Okay.
a podcast.
it's doing the whole
What is?
thing, reading off people's names and stuff. All right. So what are we doing?
Okay,
No,
we're
I-
doing.
Gathered us
I have to think of a way to get it started in my head. Still kind of an intro, but
But not like the podcast thing. Yeah.
all right. 37 people watching. We can start. Gibbs is in the chat. Gibbs, make sure no one says bad stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
I will
That's why
also
we
make
pay
sure
you
no
the
one
little
says bad
bucks.
stuff.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Jesse, or Game Over Jesse, as all of you may know me. Today, we're going to be talking about Ura Zelda, Zelda 64, the beta for Ocarina of Time, however you may know it. With us is a lot of guests. Chiblima, who you all may know in her Nintendo Super Smash Bros. Shirt to my left on the screen. And then we have Connor, the chicken nugget with feet and hands.
Yes, a lot.
Up above him, we have J-Link. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
that's me.
beside him, in the middle, at the top, we have Shay, or Shaydappa, correct?
Hello. Close. Should I?
Alright. And then above me is Tevi, who is the green-haired waifu that we all love.
Hello, everyone.
Alright, so we're going to be clearing up some misinformation
amazing.
about what exactly Ura Zelda is, because there have been lots of YouTube channel that will take like one quote and then make a 10-minute video about what they think Nintendo or Miyamoto means by that single quote. And basically, you've probably seen a lot of videos lately about how people are hoping that Nintendo, with the Nintendo 64 Mini, or even whenever Ocarina of Time 3D released, that they hoped they could release DLC or some sort of update, kind of like what they did with Star Fox 2 when they released it. It was originally unreleased, canceled, and then they released it as a bonus game on the Super Nintendo Classic. So that's not possible for the Nintendo 64 Mini unless they released an entirely different game than what Ocarina of Time was. So we're going to start with from Nintendo's own website in 1997, when the Ura expansion was still planned. They have a rundown, description, story, synopsis, whatever you want to call it, of Zelda 64's full story. And then we have some other quotes after that. And basically the history of Ocarina of Time, I kind of explained it to everyone before we started, but it began as an idea for the Super Nintendo. And then like nothing really came of that because they moved it over to the Nintendo 64, similar to what they did with Mother 3, which eventually released on the Game Boy Advanced, or even Zelda 3 or Link to the Past began on the original Nintendo, and then it was moved to the Super Nintendo. So the same thing happened with Ocarina of Time. It was an idea around the time that the Super Nintendo was coming out, and then they started planning Ocarina of Time and Super Mario 64 around the same time. And ideas that they thought were great ideas but couldn't necessarily use for Super Mario 64, they saved for Ocarina of Time, which is kind of what they did if you go back and read interviews from the first Mario game and the first Zelda game. So they saved up all of these ideas, and then whenever they finished Super Mario 64, they finally began full production on Ocarina of Time. Originally, it was going to be just a disk drive game, sort of like the Doshin the Giant game that's on the Nintendo 64 disk drive. And it was just going to be, there wasn't going to be a cartridge, it was just going to be a disc that would work in the disk drive, but then the disk drive started not selling well, and they were afraid that if they released it as a disk drive game, then they would lose a bunch of money on it because nobody was buying the disk drive. So instead, they moved it to a cartridge game with the disk drive expansion. So the main game would be on the cartridge, and then what couldn't fit on the cartridge because it needed to be on the disk drive, they used as the expansion. But then the expansion itself was eventually canceled as well, so they ended up making Ocarina of Time as complete as they possibly could on the cartridge itself without an expansion, which is why you have some things that's in the final game, like the Running Man, that you can't beat because that was a planned quest for the Ura expansion, where you would get these masks, they would have different abilities, sort of like in Majora's Mask. So an example is in Majora's Mask, you put on the bunny hood and you can run faster. In Ocarina of Time, the bunny hood gives you no abilities, but when you're a child and you're in the overworld, if you give the bunny hood to the Running Man that's running around Hyrule Field, he runs really fast. So it gives him the ability, but not you. In the Ura expansion, it would have given you the ability, and then you possibly would have been able to beat the Running Man in that one quest. And there were some other things that were left in the game, but basically that was it. So, going over all of Nintendo's words on this, we're going to go over some quotes and interviews and material released by Nintendo. So this isn't speculation, rumors, anything made up. This is all coming directly from Nintendo. So the original story for Zelda 64 took a long time to finally start. Basically, and we'll go through interviews here in a second to get to this, but the main reason that Ura Zelda would not be able to work with the base Ocarina of Time game is because in Ocarina of Time, you begin as a child, and then after 3 dungeons, you get the Master Sword, you become an adult. When the Ura expansion was planned, you would begin the game as an adult, not a child, and then halfway through the game, you would become a child. So that's the version of Ocarina of Time that Ura Zelda was made for. But when they tried to make the game as complete as possible without the expansion, they changed the story around to where you began as a child. So, alright, I guess we can start. Is everybody ready?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's go.
Jeez.
That's a good intro.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Alright, so from Nintendo's website from like 1997, this was some marketing, like a marketing page that they released that showed off some new screenshots and just a long description. So it starts out and says, prepare to journey once again. Oh yeah, it's important to note it was still Zelda 64 at this time, not Ocarina of Time. And this was when the expansion was still planned for it, I think. Alright. Prepare to journey once again to Hyrule, land of the ancestors of the gods, in Zelda 64. As Zelda 64 gets closer to release this winter in Japan, additional details about the game's setting and story are being revealed by the game's developers. Even though Zelda 64's story is set in the misty past, players will once again take on the mantle of the young hero. So it says takes place in the mystic past because the same thing that they did with Skyward Sword, where they set it at the very beginning of the timeline. Ocarina of Time is also supposed to take place at the very beginning of the timeline. But then they kept on making games that went further and further back in time. Anyways, it says Link is preparing for his coming-of-age ceremony, in which he will receive his guardian spirit in the tradition of his people. Children receive a fairy from the fairy tree when they reach adulthood. So this is another thing that hints towards you. There's an interview later on with Miyamoto where he actually comes out and says that you begin the game as an adult. But right here, it says children receive the fairy once they become an adult. So you begin the game, there's a coming-of-age party or ceremony, Link gets his fairy. So the Kokiri in this version aren't necessarily like a bunch of little kids that stay young forever. They all get their fairy once they become an adult. So you would see kids without fairies that would just be normal Kokiri kids, but then you would see the adult Kokiri with fairies. So that was another thing that was changed. But continuing, Link is preparing his coming-of-age ceremony in which he will receive his guardian spirit. In the tradition of his people, children receive a fairy from the fairy tree when they reach adulthood. This fairy becomes a person's lifelong familiar. The fairy accompanies the youthful adventurer seeking his or her fortune in the maze-like forest or in the lands beyond. Link's ceremony, however, is not destined to be a happy one. The creature from the depths of the forest, Link is able to locate his... Oh yeah, I skipped a line. So, is not destined to be a happy one. The fairy tree, source of the guardian spirits, is captured by a strange creature from the depths of the forest. Link is able to locate his guardian spirit, Navi, and with her help, slay the creature. However, in the process, the fairy tree, not the Deku tree, just known as the fairy tree at this point, is grievously damaged. As its life force ebbs, the fairy tree speaks the words that will shape Link's destiny. Do not allow the thief Ganondorf to claim the Triforce. The tree mystically communicates. O brave one, you must take the sacred stone to a wise man. So, in that version, the Queen Goma, captures somehow the Deku tree, instead of Ganondorf cursing the Deku tree. Ganondorf was infamous throughout the land for his evil practices as the king of thieves. He lusted for the power of the Triforce and searched throughout Hyrule for its resting place. Most recently, plunging into the forest of Link's people, Link knew he was in grave danger should Ganondorf find him. He took the sacred stone from the fairy tree and set out for Hyrule Castle, the capital of the Hyrulean people. Upon entering the castle, Link is welcomed by the young Princess Zelda, a woman, not a child, of the Hyrulean royal family about the same age as he. She is well aware of the crisis facing the land of Hyrule. Zelda relates further details about the Triforce's hidden place, telling Link that he needs to find the 3 sacred stones that fit into a magical ocarina, which serves as the key to the hidden realm. Link's race with the evil Ganondorf to find the sacred stones and the hiding place of the Triforce is on. So in this version, you could also... There's not many details on what exactly the Sacred Stones did, but in the Ocarina of Time that we all played, you just collect them after you beat the dungeons, and then you can put them on the pedestal or whatever, and you play the Song of Time. In this version, you would just have them like the... what was it? It's either the medallions were equipable, or it was the stones that you could use. And instead of having something like Din's Fire... you would use the Goron's Ruby or the Red Medallion to use what became Din's Fire. So they would give you different abilities, similar to when you beat the dungeons or the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, and they give you some sort of ability, whether it's like Darunia's shield or whatever. So, anyways... Zelda 64 tells of the story of an earlier age of Hyrule when Ganon was merely known as the King of Thieves and not the powerful creature of evil he becomes in the other Legend of Zelda adventures. In this role-playing game, the story unfolds in a realistic 3D world. The depth of the backgrounds, the dramatic camera angles, and the realistic objects and animations all combine to create one of the most immersive gaming experiences ever. Although the gameplay has been designed so that anyone can enjoy it, the adventures will not be without its challenges. Great battles will reward the courageous. The fairy, Navi, will accompany you on your journey, providing hints, warning you of enemy attacks, and helping you to search for items. While a North American release date has not been announced, the game is targeted to release in Japan by the end of 1997. Zelda 64 will be a 256 megabit cartridge. So, that was the original story. it ends saying that it's on the cartridge here, but the Ura expansion was still planned, and then they ended up delaying it until 1998, and likely they delayed it so that they could like fix the story and make it the Ocarina of Time that we know instead of what they described to us here. So, I guess, does anyone have any thoughts on the original story before we move on to some of the interviews or the quotes? Because beginning Ocarina of Time as an adult is a lot different than beginning as a child like we did in Ocarina of Time. So
I was actually going to say, because earlier today you sent a quote about something in our chat, and you were like, in this game you get to become young Link, and I was like, no way, you get to become not like young Link, but it was like totally out of context, so I was like, of course, like, I'm learning mostly about a lot of the Ura Zelda stuff right now, because like I've been on a couple of videos talking about Ura Zelda, but so far I haven't retained a lot of information about it.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Sorry.
But definitely my favorite is I went into the More Zelda 64 screenshots, and there's a really nice quote at the very bottom, and it's like, Link will be a fully three-dimensional character with high levels of detail. You can even find that his ear is pierced. And it shows like front-facing Link, side-facing Link, just to show off his ear piercing.
Yeah, and it's just like a yellow spleck because of the graphics at the time.
Like, such detail. Love it.
I think storyline for the original, like Zelda 64, is really interesting if you take into consideration like official timeline that Nintendo has given regarding the like split timeline. Because if Link is a child, there's not that 7-year gap to then create the like 3 different timelines of the hero is good, heroes, and then like child Link adventure is us like all of, which I know you said in the intro that without that, if Ura Zelda was, there would be no like Wind Waker and a lot of other, but like Zelda was released, there really would be no like problem at all that timeline, then be like not, if you consider the fact that start off as adult, because there's no child Link break off.
So, your mic kept cutting out like every couple of seconds whenever you were talking.
Oh, no!
But I think we understood what you were trying to say. I think that's why.
That's why the entire time I was like,
Yeah, I got it.
is that my computer?
Yeah, we understand.
Yeah. So, Connor, Tevi, Jacob, do you guys have any thoughts?
I'll let the guys go. I got some stuff, but they can go.
Connor, you go ahead and go first.
Start with Sexy Mac.
Yeah, let's let the Sexy Mac. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it would be very interesting to see like just how the story would go from like where it like starts off with that kind of description, because like Ocarina of Time is such a different game when compared to it. Like it's just a sort of a big leap to go from one story to that one. I don't know. I feel like there'd just be a lot of different changes that just would make it just a completely different game at that point.
Yeah. All right, Tevi.
I agree with everybody else. I think that what we could have had for Ura Zelda was pretty interesting. The fact that you don't immediately start out as a child. And, you know, it just kind of makes you think of, you know, this is what could have been instead of, like, what it is now. And, you know, it's just really interesting to, like, think about these kind of things. So, you know, I like it.
For me, it's very interesting. Like, I just grew up with the game. Like I said earlier, I played it since I was 2 or 3 on the Nintendo 64 edition. But it's just amazing like how much they've changed and like how much they changed it in like 1 year. Because Japan in 1997 winter time. Like I like the idea of like what they wanted to do with the stones for crying out loud. Like originally I thought it was just like, oh, you're just gonna put it in a pedestal, sing Song of Time. It actually makes so much sense to put the stones in and then sing the Song of Time, or like play the Song of Time for the Ocarina to open up the door to the master. That was actually pretty sad that they didn't keep it.
Yeah, so
I read this article. like it makes so much sense, like why those 3 stones would be important. So just put them on a pedestal, things on time. There you go. Like it makes so much sense to put it in an Ocarina and do it.
Yeah. So 404 UNF donated $5 and says, "You used medallions to do abilities originally, not the stones." Yeah. So that's what I was trying to think of earlier. And if you, so like the forest medallion has, like, instead of a leaf, like you would imagine a forest medallion would have on it, it has like wind blowing, and then when you get to the section at the end in Ganon's castle, it's a bunch of wind puzzles, not necessarily forest themed puzzles. So like that would have been Furor's wind, I guess, and then the fire medallion would have basically been dense fire, and they would have all sort of done something. Some people even think that that's how you would have originally unlocked like the fire arrows and the ice arrows as well, by equipping them with the arrow. And then the spiritual stones, the ability that they would have is when they all come together, there's even some screenshots of Ocarina of Time that you can see where it has the 3 spiritual stones placed in, and that gives the Ocarina of Time its ability to actually open up the gate of time. Which makes me think like it would sort of have, instead of like traveling to the future to stop Ganondorf, like after you get the Master Sword or whatever, in this game I imagine you would go to the past to try and stop Ganondorf before he even sets out to do something bad. Like maybe that's the reason that you go to the past, or maybe he just goes to the past to like try to figure out his plan before it happens. Who knows what the story could have been, but that was be really interesting to like find out what the full story is instead of just that beginning story where you began as adult. So that was the story from Nintendo that was posted on their website when the game was originally supposed to release in 1997. This next part is from IGN, but it's an interview from November 17th in 1998. So like within a month or two of when Ocarina of Time originally released. It says, "Last week, IGN64 sat down with the Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto to talk about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and other upcoming Nintendo 64 games. In the interview, we asked Mr. Miyamoto about the progress of the 64 disk drive edition of Zelda. As you may remember, Nintendo initially announced that Zelda would include so-called 64 disk drive hooks, which allow the game to access data stored on the 64 disk drive, if the drive is connected. The quote says, "Ocarina of Time has been designed with the disk drive system in mind," Mr. Miyamoto told IGN64. "More specifically, if you connect Zelda with the disk drive, an icon will appear on screen announcing Ura Zelda or another Zelda," which is what Ura means in English. It just means another. "There was several ideas that I could not incorporate in the current game because of the time shortage and other reasons. In the future, I want some new areas and new dungeons to be available for players who have already finished Ocarina of Time, where they will find new challenges." So this is important because there are quotes from Miyamoto, and we'll get to some of these quotes as well, where Miyamoto or Iwata at the time, even some from Aonuma, I believe, where they say that Master Quest that released with the Gamecube and originally released on the Gamecube with the pre-order of Wind Waker, and then they re-released it with Ocarina of Time 3D. So when you bought that game, you'd get Ocarina of Time and Ocarina of Time Master Quest, which was just Ocarina of Time with the same dungeons, but remixed. It added no new content, no new tunics, weapons, items. Everything was literally the exact same, except the dungeons were remixed. But here, we can see Miyamoto describing it as something different, where he says he wants new areas and new dungeons to be available for players who have already finished Ocarina of Time. So some of the other areas and dungeons, like the Ice Dungeon, is one that he's mentioned in an interview, where the Ice Cavern in Ocarina of Time was only like half of a dungeon. And then it had like a mini boss, if you would even call it that, the two ice Stalfos or the snow Stalfos. Not Stalfos, Wolfos.
Yeah, Wolfos.
Yeah, and you get the iron boots. Originally, that and some other areas would have been actual full-fledged dungeons, not just whatever. My mind's going blank. Not just mini dungeons. So, continuing, but I just wanted to, that was one of the interviews that I wanted to mention, because there are interviews later on where Miyamoto, just to shut the fans up, because at this point everyone was like, I bought Ocarina of Time in hopes that I would be able to get the Ura expansion later on. Where's the extra dungeons? Where's the extra items? Where's all this stuff? So in this quote, he says there were several ideas that he wanted to incorporate in the current game, but because of time shortages, he couldn't. So because of those time shortages, I think that's why they simplified what the expansion would have been and eventually just made it to what Master Quest is now, instead of actually adding in new villages and dungeons and stuff. So in a way, he is correct now when he says Master Quest is the Ura expansion, but what the Ura expansion was originally going to be was very different than Master Quest. So, I just think that interview is very important, where he actually says it's going to be new dungeons and new areas and stuff. There's also one later on, if we get to it, where he talks about he wanted to have some sort of online connectivity with the Ura Zelda, but that would have likely just been to keep time scores or something. Who knows? Anyways, it continues. While the prospect of new adventures and dungeons sound intriguing, even Mr. Miyamoto is still unsure about the future of the Disk Drive add-on, which would unlock the new quests when coupled with the optional Zelda Disk Drive disc. We were assuming that the disk drive system would be introduced next year, said Miyamoto, but since the disk drive hasn't been introduced, we have to still determine product reliability and other factors, which may not allow us to release Ura Zelda next year. So what happens in the extra quest if the DD doesn't come out, said Miyamoto candidly. If that happens, we cannot introduce the second game. We may have to have a special edition release in the future. Since Nintendo of America is currently not planning to release the 64 disk drive in the US, the prospects of a special edition of Ura Zelda, or perhaps a lock-on cart with new adventures, are a good indication of what's to come in 1999. So, that was one interview around the release of the game. And then this next one is the Yamako WordPress. But it's from Dream Magazine, I believe, which was, I think it was UK's Nintendo Power magazine. He talks about a bunch of different disk drive stuff in here, and even in this game, you can see there's a screenshot of Adult Link, fighting Queen Goma with the Forest Medallion equipped. So, let's see here.
There's the picture.
Tell us about the controls in Zelda 64. You can switch between normal view and first-person mode by using the top C button. There are all kinds of convenient camera modes. The player will be moving the camera around relatively often, but the controls are simple, so that's basically the same. What are the items like in Zelda 64? The Boomerang is great in 3D. We've retained a lot of the items that have always been around, including the hookshot, but we're not depending on the 3D transition to do all the work in making the items great. My favorite 3D item is the Boomerang. It comes back to you after you throw it, and if you miss the catch upon its return, you grunt as it smacks you. It makes me pretty happy. So that was another thing that was cut from the game. Because they weren't using the disk drive, they had to cut out a lot of extra data, so extra animations and stuff that Link would do. Is time the theme of Zelda 64? He says, the flow of time is a fundamental system of the game. This time you can become young Link. So this is the quote from earlier, where the page that we read earlier, where Miyamoto said, or that Nintendo was saying, that you began the game as adult Link, and then you would go through the game. So this right here, again, is where Miyamoto says, this time you can become young Link. So time is a fundamental element Time flows naturally in the game, but as you know, scenario changes throughout the day. Sunlight, light colors, it's all there, so get excited. And then it goes on to talk about Super Mario 64 2, which is another canceled game that was for the 64 disk drive. It makes me really sad. If you go to the Iwata Asks, there is an interview that Iwata did with Aonuma whenever Ocarina of Time 3D came out. And he says, starting under the picture of Iwata with Aonuma, says, "That's right, it made us very, very happy laughs even after its release. I felt that we had really done something special. I felt very fulfilled at the time. I think Shigeru Miyamoto-san had the same feeling, but apparently he also felt as though there was still quite a lot left to do. Miyamoto really is greedy about things like that, isn't he?" Aonuma says, "And so he said, we'd already made 3D models for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. By changing the situation, couldn't we make new ways to play a new story? So you made The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask." No, we didn't just start making The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, not right away. There was actually a flip side, and in the beginning... There's an Ember Alert. It's sad.
Oh.
Yeah. We didn't just start making The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, not right away. There was actually a flip side, and in the beginning the idea was to make a Ura flip side Zelda. That Ura Zelda, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest, was developed for the 64 disk drive. Ultimately, we recorded it on a limited edition disc that went to people who reserved The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Ultimately, other staff members handled The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Still, as someone who has been in charge of the dungeons, I couldn't get that excited over making a flip side for them. I couldn't see it turning into a new Legend of Zelda either. But we'd been told to make The Legend of Zelda. It isn't as though we could just say, I don't want to, and end it there. At that point, Miyamoto gave us a trade-off. He said, if we could make a new The Legend of Zelda game in 1 year, then it wouldn't have to be a flip side. Iwata says, well, so you're saying The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was the result of your team picking up the gauntlet he'd thrown down? Aonuma says, yes, that was the deal, but The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time did take 3 years to make, you know. And we were supposed to make its sequel in 1 year. At first, we had absolutely no idea of what sort of thing we were supposed to make, and we just kept expanding our plans. At that point, the 3-day system, the idea of a compact world to be played over and over again, came down from Miyamoto and one other director, Yoshiaki Koizumi, who's now the current president of Nintendo. We added that to the mix, and then finally, I think it is, I hope it is. If I'm wrong, someone's going to hate me. We saw the full substance of the Legend of Zelda game we could make in 1 year. Actually, I feel as though back then we were given a glimpse of the concept that deep, compact gameplay is one form of the games of the future. I think in that sense, as a product, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was a big turning point for Nintendo. That said, I had no idea it was the result of an argument. That's correct. Aonuma laughed. Still, in the beginning, it was all trial and error. Ultimately, we adopted the 3-day system and made it so that if you couldn't clear the game inside the 3 days, the world was destroyed. Turned out to be a very tense game, didn't it? So he goes on to talk about how the leftover stuff from the Ura expansion was how they were able to get a jump start and make Majora's Mask within just 1 year, because they did have the extra dungeons and stuff that they had earlier to just like rearrange and reuse in that. This next part is just a collection of quotes. So earlier we had quotes before Ocarina of Time released where he was talking about how like it was supposed to add new areas and new dungeons and new stuff to the game. These quotes are after Ocarina of Time had released, when they had changed Ura Zelda from being an expansion to just like a remix of the actual dungeons. May 26, 1998. Well, before that, it was a Reddit post that was kind of doing the same thing that I wanted to do with this video. So, speculation aside, here's what are positive about regarding Ura Zelda's future, based entirely off of what Miyamoto has stated in interviews. Some of Shigeru Miyamoto's statements are contradicting, but keep in mind that a lot of time passed between some of them. So the contradicting part again is where he's saying that Ura Zelda was just Master Quest, nothing more. But again, that was just to get people to stop asking for it. And he's gone on to do a lot of other contradicting stuff. Like when he said there was only going to be one version of the 3DS release. And then he announced the 3DS XL like a month or two later. Anyways, these interviews, May 26. No, I skipped a paragraph. Sorry. Keep getting confused, guys. There's a lot here. Miyamoto once hinted the possibility of custom masks in Ura Zelda in a Famicom interview. We skipped over it earlier. It was the interview from the 64 Dream. This was already accomplished and implemented into Mother 3, another 64 disk drive game. You would take the pictures with a Game Boy, then transmit them to the disk drive, and then to Ura Zelda. So that was one of the other features where, like Pokemon Stadium had the Game Boy adapter on it. If you guys remember that, you could play the Game Boy Pokemon games with Pokemon Stadium. So you would be able to take a picture with your camera on your Game Boy, upload it to the disk drive, and use that picture as a mask. So presumably you would be able to take a picture of yourself and use the picture of yourself as a custom mask. Finally, the interview. From the 64 disk drive, we were working on a Zelda game which we call Ura Zelda, where you first play the initial disc version of Zelda. After finishing everything, you can enter the world into the basic design of the same. The sort of WA Zelda is now in the works for the 64 disk drive. Is Miyamoto implying that Ura Zelda had features similar to those that we saw when Zelda 64 was being developed on the disk drive? The initial disc version sounds very intriguing. We know from this interview that we may have been able to explore new areas, and beating the game, the way that Shigeru Miyamoto worded it, was also unique into the basic design of the game. February 1999, so this was almost a year later, after the game had released. Miyamoto says, there were several ideas I could not incorporate into Zelda because of the lack of time and various other factors. For example, I wanted to create some extra dungeons and challenges for those who had completed the quest, and we planned for them with the predicted introduction of the disk drive next year. But now we don't know whether we will do it. We will do this or not. So I guess that's a typo. We may have to HUH, I don't know what that is, introduce a special edition cartridge next year instead. Were completely new dungeons planned. The idea of the special edition cartridge may have just ended up becoming Master Quest. August 27th, 1999. Ura Zelda is based on the Ocarina of Time for 64 disk drive. It has the construction of gameplay. It's very much a parody game based on Ocarina of Time, but with new dungeons to explore. It even features the same storyline. Is Miyamoto referencing entirely new dungeons, temples, or just new arrangements of ones that already existed? August 29th, 1999. Miyamoto says, Ura Zelda uses the same system as Ocarina of Time, but uses the 64 disk drive to add game data. The story in Ura Zelda will be similar to Ocarina of Time, but with new maps and scenarios. Does new maps mean completely new areas or rearranged versions of existing areas? Scenarios implies new side quests, so it's interesting to think that what side quests Nintendo had in mind. Another interview, doesn't have a date. Miyamoto says, Ura Zelda will use the existing Ocarina of Time cartridge, but with different dungeons and new locations for treasures. Since the 64 disk drive media is cheaper than a new cartridge, this is an inexpensive way to make a sequel. We may also consider using network technology for Ura Zelda. This leans more towards the possibility that Master Quest played an important role in Ura Zelda's development. Network technology sounds like Nintendo planned something like a boss rush or data transferring. Nintendo Mad thought that boss rush was planned as well in this thread. So the boss rush mode, if you remember in Ocarina of Time 3D, they added in, like you could go to Link's bed in Kokiri Forest, go to sleep, and then you could go through all of the boss rush modes. That was probably a feature that they finally finished for the 3D version that they couldn't put into the original. 2 interviews left. Or actually, no, just one. The last one comes from December 4th, 2002. This was around the time Wind Waker would have been releasing. Miyamoto says, although we did develop Ura for the 64 disk drive, it didn't use many of the special features, so it was very easy to port over to the Gamecube without carrying any features. It was a different port than why were there virtually no N64 disk drive references in Master Quest's data. That's a question asked by the person who collected the data. The interview goes on, where the quote says, also, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Ura Zelda isn't very different from Ocarina of Time. It's more of a second quest. People who played through Ocarina of Time would be able to play through Ura Zelda and get a few laughs at some things, find some things more difficult, and take a few varied paths. However, if you do play all the way through the end, it will not unlock anything special. The person who put together the article says this implies that Ura Zelda had minor changes. There's nothing special, just a few changes. Tone, maybe this was stated to lessen possible disappointment of gamers. The final quote says, when we switched from the cartridge to disc media, we did it in a way that would make it very similar in terms of the actual port. It was quite simple. Technically, it's easy to port Nintendo 64 games, but what type of games would people really want to play, and will there be a value there? So, a lot of the quotes at the beginning, they start out talking about, like, when they're earlier quotes from before the game released, it's Miyamoto talking about how it's going to add new dungeons, new areas to explore, and new quests and everything. And he even, in one of the interviews, he even calls it's a simple way to give the game a sequel without releasing an expensive cartridge. So, in his mind, it was going to add enough stuff or enough new things that it would have already been a sequel to Ocarina of Time. But instead, they ended up making it so that it just rearranged the dungeons in the Master Quest that we got. So, there's another couple of pages here, but I think we covered everything because it just covers the same stuff again, and I don't want to go through and repeat some of the stuff if it has some of the same interviews or similar interviews. But yeah, basically Ura Zelda started as just Zelda 64 that was going to be made for the disk drive, and then they realized that they couldn't, so they switched it to work with just the cartridge, and all of the extra stuff that was going to be part of Zelda 64, they just bundled it into the expansion that was going to be Ura Zelda. And then as time went on, they realized that, again, no one's buying the disk drive, so they canceled the expansion and just made the base game that is Ocarina of Time. But it's really interesting because you have all those interviews, and then before that we had the page from Nintendo's own website where they talk about how you would have began the game as an adult and a bunch of other stuff. So I think what happened was probably when they, because one of the other interviews talks about how Miyamoto says before Ocarina of Time's release, they had went back and changed the story. And I think what happened was Ocarina of Time with the Ura expansion, it was going to have, like, I think the Ura expansion was going to be the version of the game to where you started out as an adult and then you become a child or whatever. And the planned Ura expansion they had was going to work. It was going to be the expansion to that version of the game. And whenever they changed the story and delayed the game from 1997 to 1998, and they changed the story to make it so that you're a child and then you become an adult later on, I think they wanted to keep the idea of having an expansion for it, but instead of keeping the same type of expansion that you had with the original Ura Zelda where it added in the new dungeons and stuff, because that was made for a completely different version of the game that had a completely different story, they just remixed the dungeons that were there for Ocarina of Time. And then that became the Master Quest version. So, yeah. There's a lot of different versions that it went through to where, like, the story was changed a lot. At some points it was going to have new dungeons, and then just remixed dungeons. Sometimes it was going to be new quests and everything. And another interesting thing from another page that's on here But to quickly wrap it up, it goes over how Miyamoto talks about how Ocarina of Time originally started as just because they didn't know how powerful the Nintendo 64 was. So it was just going to be kind of a retelling of Zelda 2. And then after they started figuring out how powerful the Nintendo 64 was while they were making Super Mario 64, instead of making like a 3D remake or whatever of Zelda 2, they ended up making the entire game of The Legend of Zelda was going to take place inside of Ganon's castle. And similar to Mario with Princess Peach's castle, where you would jump through paintings and stuff. I wonder if I can find it here. But he talks about how while they were working, like building this giant elaborate castle, and like one room that you would go into would just be like a dark ocean or something like that. Another room you would go into would be all icy, which is kind of what happened with the mini dungeons inside of the temple or Ganon's castle. And then they said like Phantom Ganon was carried over from that original concept where he goes in and out of the paintings. That was something that they kept from that version of the game. And it ended up being, the Nintendo 64 ended up being a lot more powerful than they thought. So then they decided to make it a full open world instead of just taking place inside of a castle and then warping you to different areas. So that's about everything. So yes, Tubes, hi. Everyone, hello. Sorry I took forever explaining all of that, but that's I felt it was important because there's a lot of people that'll tell you that they are masters of what Ura Zelda was going to be, and they tell you the possibility of how Nintendo could release an update for Ocarina of Time 3D, or they could release it on the Nintendo 64 disk drive, but all they have is speculation because they still think that it's just you have Ocarina of Time and then Nintendo can release an expansion that adds all the stuff in, where the original Ura expansion in Zelda 64 was so completely different to what Ocarina of Time became that they would have to release a completely separate version of Ocarina of Time for the expansion to work. So, yeah, Tubes, what's up? Hi.
Hello. I think it's crazy that with like all of that effort that they put into creating Ura Zelda and then not being with it, they kind of just like scrapped the entire idea and they took some of their key elements and then just moved them to different games. But like you talking about things like, oh, like you throw the boomerang and then it comes back and it hits you and you go, and how we thought that was hilarious. It's like, why? Like, include that in something else then. Like, don't let your ideas go to waste. Like, I think that Ura Zelda would be an amazing thing to happen. But, like, it's been years. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to continue to progress throughout the years. And, like, if we're lucky, maybe we'll see something along those lines. But other than that, it's just, like, all new technology. And they're really just, like, giving us their all in their current games that they're working on. So
all
much
right.
Ura Zelda knowledge.
Connor, do you have anything?
So building a little bit off of what Tubes had said, the thing is, I do recognize that there's probably a lot of ideas that were thrown out just because it was like part of Ura Zelda and wouldn't work in the original game, but I'm sure that Nintendo and all that they do probably did encompass a lot of what they had for Ura Zelda in different games. Like even if it didn't make it into the actual Zelda games, it was probably in the games in different franchises and stuff. And for a lot of those concepts, I'm guessing that they probably also like saw like other companies doing things that were similar in games and then like gauge the reactions from that as well to see if it would still fit into their games. There's probably some reasons why they're not in there. So I would say that it'd still be cool to see what a Ura Zelda might look like.
Yeah. So really quick, I want to go over this last part because I found the right part, but it's from a different Iwata Asks, I believe. And it says, let me just find the part where it talks about it. So it says, like the proprietary camera system in real-time movies, Miyamoto says, right, and we had to make something big, but with limited memory. So, for example, that's not it. Iwata says, with each of them independent, they take up a lot of space. They take a lot of memory space. Miyamoto says, right, so I would have A stay there all the time, and the other data switch in and out. If you only change what you have to, the memory is more efficient and the data reads more quickly. In other words, you make good use of the characteristics of the ROM. We put constructing the system first, and since we were going to determine the story in line with the system's capacity at first, I thought only having Ganon's Castle might be enough. Iwata says, at first you imagined Ganon's Castle as the only setting. Miyamoto says, yes. I thought about putting in all kinds of adventures into the different rooms, like making a dark meadow or an ocean, like in Princess Peach's castle in Super Mario 64. Iwata says, you imagine lots of rooms in Ganon's Castle with various worlds all connected. Miyamoto says, yes. In the worst case, Link wouldn't have been able to go outside the castle. The next page says, Iwata says, hearing that Link may not have been able to leave the castle is quite surprising. Was one reason you thought about making Ganon's Castle the only setting because early on in development you didn't think you would be able to create a huge area like Hyrule Field? Miyamoto says, yes. I thought so from the perspective of the hardware's processing abilities while making Super Mario 64 at first. I don't mind making the game complete with a single building as long as I got to make Link in 3D. Which is also something very different from what they normally say, to where they care about gameplay more than anything. They don't necessarily care about graphics or processing power or whatever. They just want to make the game fun. But here, Miyamoto says the exact opposite, where he says, I didn't mind making the game complete with a single building as long as I got to make Link in 3D. So right there, Miyamoto's saying, as long as I get like this new technology with advanced graphics to where I can make a game in 3D, I'll be happy. Even if it means not getting the Ocarina of Time that we got, but getting one to where you're just stuck in a castle the whole time. He goes on and says, in other words, it might have turned out like Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Koizumi said, did say that they were experimenting with polygon versions of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link from the Super Famicom system. Miyamoto says, that's right. Partially because of that, I started making it with the idea of that Ganon's Castle might be enough. For example, there's a room in which you fight Phantom Ganon after he rides a horse out of a picture. Iwata says, yeah, the boss battle in the Forest Temple. Miyamoto says, that is a glimpse of an idea that I had started making during the time that I was saying to the others. At the very least, it'll be like this. Iwata says, okay, now that you mention it, I can see it, because the fight against Phantom Ganon unfolds inside a room. By the way, one early task was Chamboris-style, theatrical, Japanese-style sword fighting. So this goes on to say, this is actually really funny, because Did You Know Gaming posted a video not long ago about Ocarina of Time, and everything that they covered in the video is also covered in this interview. So that's interesting. But yeah, so originally the fight against Phantom Ganon was just an idea they had for one of the rooms inside Ganon's castle, and they repurposed it for the boss of the Forest Temple, which is, yeah. Alright, so finally I'm done. I just wanted to find that really quick, because I know someone in the comments will be like, he's making that up. It wasn't going to take place inside Ganon's castle. That would be stupid. Why would they make a game take place entirely inside a castle? And then I would say Super Mario 64. But yeah, so apparently at first Zelda was just going to be Super Mario 64, but with Link traveling through pictures like Phantom Ganon. So, yeah.
Let's slay.
Yeah, Jacob, what are your thoughts on all this?
A lot of information to process, that's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I see the copy and paste thing. Like, what they were trying to do. Like, what they did with Mario, because Mario came out, like, 96, I believe, on the Nintendo 64, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat, or people. And then,
Zelda
I
was
like
originally supposed to come out the next year, but then it was delayed. Because
but I'm actually glad, like, what we got in the end result, because I don't mind what they did with Mario 64. They did. I just would have been like, why? Why copy and paste to make it like Zelda? Like, why? Like, when we already have Mario. Like, they've gone through so many changes, like, in a span of, like, they announced in, like, I believe about Zelda, or was it 95?
What was that?
Did all these changes, like when they announced Ocarina of Time, like in 64, like when it's called Zelda 64, was it like 96 or 97?
They first announced it when they like announced the Nintendo 64 with Super Mario 64 and everything, but it was just like they said originally they had 3. It's in the same interview. They had 3 people working on Ocarina of Time, and then once Super Mario 64, Super Mario 64 got closer and closer to being finished, they would put more and more of Super Mario 64 team on Ocarina of Time. And then
I can see like what was in Mario 64 and what they put into the final product of what became Ocarina of Time. Like obviously that Phantom Ganon fight in Forest Temple, like what they did in Mario 64. But I actually like what we got in the end. I don't mind if it was a copy paste version of it, because Ocarina of Time is my favorite game of all time, and that was actually the first game I ever played.
Yeah,
I don't mind. It's just that it's just crazy how much they went into just like one game. Like if you think like how much they went in for like this is like probably a close second and like how much change they put into it. It's just amazing like what they could do, and like it was the even question like 64 was at its time is like, okay, we can only do this, but they're like, oh, we can do more. Like even for example, like if they could add opponent into the game, which they ended up doing. But it's just amazing like how much change it's gone into that game.
Yeah, one of the things. Sorry.
Hey, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. You were saying it's amazing like how much they ended up being able to add to the game. But one of the things that Miyamoto really, really wanted to do in Ocarina of Time that he wasn't able to do until the GameCube was something that was really simple, which was just he wanted to have Link be able to have sword combat while riding Epona. But he wasn't able to do that until almost 10 years later when Twilight Princess released. Well, 8 years later. But when Twilight Princess released, he had been wanting to do that for so long that's why it's such a big focus in Twilight Princess. That the first trailer that they showed off for it, a big epic moment was when Link was riding on Epona and like hitting the other enemies that are riding on the boars and stuff. And then that's the same E3 trailer where you see or hear everyone like cheering for the game and stuff. And then it's when you first get on Epona, or whenever you first get Epona back after going to Kakariko Village, it's a huge part of the game there where you have to like fight against King Bulblin. You have to do it 1 or 2 more times. It's one of the main parts of the final battle. Like you literally have to chase Ganondorf down and stop him. So that was why they made it such a big part of Twilight Princess, because he wanted to do it in Ocarina of Time, but because the console wasn't powerful enough, he couldn't do it. And then something really funny. Just G in the chat earlier said, if they can put an ocean in the castle, they can put a field in the castle. So it's really, I thought it was really funny, because in Miyamoto's mind, it's like, if you can put an ocean inside one of the rooms in the castle, why can't you put a giant field? Like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. But maybe Miyamoto just meant like how it's all connected. Like in Ocarina of Time, like you go from the castle to the overworld to Kakariko Village to the overworld to wherever. Maybe that wasn't possible, but making like different rooms on their own was possible. I don't know. Anyways, finish, Jacob.
It's like just crazy how much change they went. How much change just went to that one game that would also define like what we would get in like future games. Like obviously, like what you said about from Twilight Princess, like Miyamoto really wanted that for like so long, and it took him like wanted to be like, let's just do Wind Waker, because why not? Like, horse now, we'll put you in a boat and put you in the sea. How about that? Riding in a boat's fun with cannons. So, it just amazes me. Like, he waited like just to put that into like Twilight Princess, which is like HD Ocarina Time basically, without all that stuff. Right. like how much change means that us to define like what we get in like right now, Breath of the Wild from like 1998, like basically from 1990 way up to its release, how much it's changed Zelda like gaming for like 20 years basically. So that's basically my thoughts on like all the change that's happened, like to that one little game.
Yeah. All right, Shay. We're now at you.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in. So.
Really, but one of the like really interesting things is going back to like how different Zelda is from like Ocarina, and thinking back on that like one comment that Miyamoto said that like he doesn't know how marketable that would be if they were to do it as Zelda right now because it's so different from Ocarina. That it's really interesting to think about how many different ways could market, because everyone what they put as Zelda right now is like Ocarina of Time but with DLC, and that's not what we have come to know Good Zelda as. So I was thinking that like what could be done with it, you like release it in a very special way to like, I don't know, like a like charity or whatever with like runners, and have runners like do a blind playthrough of it and call it just the beta. But then I remembered that pro gaming isn't as big as Japan, so that would definitely have to come from an overseas thing. And I can go into reasons why pro gaming isn't as big, but you guys that now. But yeah, that's mostly my thoughts. That while the fans are really excited for Zelda, it just doesn't possible at all at this point. Even closer to when the even with how different Zelda is from Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I always thought about was the original idea they had, because you said they could really like re-release it for like a charity or special occasion or whatever. You were cutting out, so that's what you were saying?
Yeah. Okay. That's exactly what I was saying.
Okay, so
it's like a one-time thing.
If you remember on the Gamecube, whenever they showed it off, the Zelda tech demo they had was in the style of Ocarina of Time, but it was just more detailed, and it was Link. He like throws his shield down and runs after Ganondorf. Ganondorf runs after him. They have a sword fight, and it cuts off and goes to like Banjo-Kazooie or something on the Gamecube, which is something else we never got. But I always hoped or thought that before they decided on the Wind Waker's art style and graphics, that the game that they were going to make using that updated Ocarina of Time art style would have been the original story from Ocarina of Time, because the story that they ended up doing was completely different than the original story. So I was hoping that the Zelda GameCube game would have just been that original Zelda 64 story with all of the dungeons and stuff from the expansion, but updated to look good on the GameCube, like the tech demo. So that was always my thought, because in that tech demo it had you as adult Link, and it could have just been like repurposed that story to where you start out as an adult and then you go and save Hyrule. Just repurpose it so that after Majora's Mask, when Link becomes an adult naturally instead of skipping forward 7 years, then maybe that game could start. I don't know. Anyways, that's yeah. Tevi, hi, how are you? You're looking gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
We can't even see you, so never mind.
I know I did the hair flip for him.
Thank you.
No, it's the cap flip.
The cap flip, yes. So earlier you guys were talking about kind of like how Ocarina of Time was originally going to use the castle hub world idea that Mario 64 had, but it was Ganon's Tower instead.
Yeah.
And I've kind of always wanted to see that idea kind of brought back and reintroduced, because well, I guess one of my favorite things about these two franchises is that they always have like things that parallel each other, or they're always somehow connected. Like in the original Legend of Zelda, a lot of the sprites from Mario Brothers were reused. Obviously, Ocarina of Time, they were originally going to do the dungeon, stuff like that, and obviously there's like Easter eggs and references in between.
Yeah, and we were playing Four Swords yesterday, and we've seen a bunch of Mario characters show up in Four Swords.
Yeah, that was great. But getting back to Ura Zelda, there was just like a lot of content that was presented here that made me think, what if we were in the timeline where Ura Zelda came out? Would it still be as good of a game, or even better than what Ocarina of Time is right now? And for better or worse, I think it would have made the experience a little bit more interesting, but it might have overall been the same game, just with a few more bells and whistles. But then again, at the same time, there could be a lot more that was planned. But it's all very interesting to me, and I think I can take away something from this. I learned something today.
Yeah. So, thinking that we did miss out on stuff or whatever, Miyamoto and Aonuma have both said that whenever they have something that goes unused in one game, whether it's a Zelda game or Mario or Pikmin or whatever, they will reuse it for the next game. Like they'll come up with an idea, or in Zelda's case, a dungeon or a puzzle specifically for a certain type of dungeon, but then they start thinking, well, there's already a lot of puzzles like that, so we'll just save it for the next game. And then whenever they get to finishing like Ocarina of Time, they have all this stuff that went unused, so whenever they go to make the next game, whether it's Majora's Mask or Wind Waker, they already have pre-production already started, because they can just reuse all of these good ideas that they couldn't fit into the last game. And so for instance, in Majora's Mask, you have Snowhead Temple. Is it a temple? Is it just Snowhead?
Snowhead Temple, yes.
Yeah.
So that's what it's called, yeah.
Yeah. So you have that dungeon in Majora's Mask, which is an ice dungeon. And then in Ocarina of Time, you had an ice dungeon that was canceled. And they just made it like a bunch of rupee puzzles where you collect a bunch of different silver rupees. It's not really a real dungeon. But since Majora's Mask was... Like, a lot of people talk about how if a game's rushed, it's not going to be good, because they didn't take their time to make it great. But the entire purpose of Majora's Mask, as we learned from this, was for them to rush it and make it in less than a year. That was the entire plan. They could work on a new Zelda game if they could finish it in 1 year. So Majora's Mask, being on like the top of a lot of people's favorite games list, was only created because it was rushed. So that's like a contradicting thing that I always think of when people say like, oh, this game is rushed, it's no good. But anyways, the point is, people that were missing or wishing they could have experienced Ura Zelda or some sort of expansion, Majora's Mask probably had all of the puzzles and stuff that you would have found, and like the big focus on masks and side quests that would have been in Ura, or not Ura Zelda, but yeah, Ura Zelda were repurposed for Majora's Mask. Like the bunny hood didn't do anything in Ocarina of Time. Originally it would have let you beat the Running Man, supposedly. You get an entire game based around that. So in the end, with Majora's Mask, not only did you get most of what probably would have been in Ura Zelda, but you also got a lot more. And then if Ura Zelda would have released, then like we talked about earlier, they wouldn't have had Majora's Mask, which means that they would have not gotten tired of the art style that Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask had, which meant instead of getting Wind Waker, you probably would have gotten a new game that just looked like an enhanced version of Ocarina of Time. And then Twilight Princess came about because Wind Waker's graphics were cartoony and everyone in America apparently complained about it. So they changed it to be the exact opposite, which was realistic. And then with Skyward Sword, they came up with those graphics because it was a mixture of both. Because they were fans of Wind Waker, they were fans of Twilight Princess. So they wanted a way to kind of please both people, and they decided on the painting art style. So every game that came after Ura Zelda or Majora's Mask were influenced by whether or not that game was released. So I think Connor mentioned earlier we probably would have eventually gotten games in that art style, but it wouldn't be the exact game. Like, Wind Waker 2 was another cancelled game, not Phantom Hourglass, but just Wind Waker 2, which would have been a mix of what Wind Waker and Twilight Princess was, to where it would have been a bunch of different islands on an open sea, like Wind Waker, but there would have been one giant landmass where you would have gotten like Toon Epona and Toon Adult Link and all of these things that we still haven't got because people complained. Yeah, so that's another story for another time. But anyways, yeah, Tubes, hi, save me. I don't know how to stop talking.
I don't know how to shut you up.
I mean, he's speaking lore and history right here. How do you shut that up?
Exactly.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
I mean, like, the entire reason why we even decided to do this right now is because we're all here learning and also allowing other people to learn more about Ura Zelda, because that's what people ask about all the time, which is crazy because you have so many videos on your channel dedicated to Ura Zelda. Like, you and Daniel talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
But here it is. It's like all out in the open.
I could give you an interesting fact, like.
Well, the reason that it's so interesting is because you'll go to one person's YouTube channel and they'll have like an interview with Miyamoto where he said that it was only supposed to be Master Quest that came out like around 1999 or 2000, where Miyamoto, instead of talking about all of this new stuff it was supposed to bring, he's just like, oh, it did release. It was Master Quest. So their video is saying, hey, this is all the stuff that would have been in Ura Zelda, and then they go on to describe how the dungeons were remixed. And then you get people that take a quote from like 1997, when the Ura expansion was supposed to add in all of these new dungeons and villages and weapons and stuff. And instead of saying exactly what the game would have added in, they would have just been like, oh, well, to get into the fire dungeon, you need a red tunic. To get into the water temple, you need the iron boots and the blue tunic. So if there would have been an ice dungeon, maybe there would have been a white tunic. So they add in a lot of speculation that we don't necessarily know was going to be there or not. But in the game's code, I think there is stuff for like an ice temple, and there is something for a sky temple. So, yeah. And then there was, again, the Sky Temple, or the Wind Temple, whatever it would have been called.
Yeah, Wind Temple, yeah.
What was it? The medallion for the forest was wind. And then when you get to Ganon's castle, the forest section is wind puzzles. So a lot of people thought before it was the forest temple, it would have just been the wind temple. And then a lot of other confusion comes from people like, there's some people that are like really big fans of his, and then there's like 10 times more that really, really hate him. But if you look up Ura Zelda, you're most likely going to come across something talking about the Zeth 64 project, which was someone, like, there's tons of people that want to make their own restoration of Ura Zelda. So like they'll make their own version of Ocarina of Time that adds in a lot of this stuff. Like they'll make their own ice dungeon or their own wind dungeon, and it's just like a fan hack or whatever. But his was probably the most popular because he was actually taking donations and stuff from people. Like long before Patreon was actually a thing, he had a forum where people would pay him to support him and the team that he had working on it. And it got popular because he was saying, hi, everyone wants Ura Zelda. I have a team. We're actually going to make it. But if you look at the final product before he canceled it, which is why everyone hates it, because he took everyone's money and he would disappear for like months at a time, and then he finally came and said it was canceled. But the product, when it was canceled, had Link... like instead of being what Ura Zelda was supposed to be, it was just using the name Ura Zelda to make money or profit and to get popular. So the artwork that you would see would be like an adult Link that wasn't the Link that we know from Ocarina of Time. It was a story taking place like years later or something, but in the same world. Sort of like a Link Between Worlds and a Link to the Past. It's a new Link, but it's in the same world. And it was something like that. And it had some cool ideas. Like, it was going to add in its own version of the Dark World, which was going to change everything in Hyrule, kind of like the Dark World in A Link to the Past. And his version of Link had green hair, which was really weird. So, like, there's all these things that he had, and it's like, you're saying you're making Ura Zelda. You're taking people's money to make Ura Zelda. But you're coming up with all of this stuff that Miyamoto, Aonuma, Nintendo, no one ever mentioned any of this. Like, there was never at any time a Dark World for Ura Zelda. There was never at any time Link with green hair. So, like, he's just, I don't know. Like, it's weird. And because of people like him and these other YouTube channels that just do their videos based off speculation instead of what we did, where we looked at most of the actual interviews, where like everything we said came directly from the people who worked on the game, to whereas a lot of people just come up with whatever they want to because they know people will click on a video that says Ura Zelda, so they'll make money from it. And
scammers gonna scam.
That's why I wanted to do this video. And we did a similar video a long time ago. And if anyone ever did find the Ura Zelda expansion, it would be Tony from Hard for Games. So if you...
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because he somehow ended up with the one and only copy of like Super Mario 64's disk drive game. But I think that was just a copy, not the actual. But still. Anyways, hi, Connor. Yes, you. Hi, Chicken Nugget. What's up?
Chicken Nugget.
Wait, you know what's up really is that I'm actually gonna have to go because I'm just, my body is just too tired. I need rest.
Yeah, and tired.
Your body's not like Reggie. You have to be ready, man.
Yeah.
All
Alright, I think we can all end it there then. So,
Yeah.
Connor, who are you? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at ConNugget. That's it. And also on YouTube. I'm in the chat, so just click on my name, and there I am. Oh boy!
All right. We'll save Tubes for last. Tevi,
Because she's special.
who are you, and why should people care about you?
My name is Tevi Bear. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Tevi.
Hi, Tevi.
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter at Ultimate Smasher. I know it's misspelled. People tell me that all the time. I'm also
It's very
on
convenient that the new Smash Bros. Game is called Ultimate.
Yes.
Oh my god, I predicted the future. You can also find me on the Game Over Jesse Discord. I pop in every once in a while, so if you guys are interested, you guys should go check out that Discord and pop by and say hi. I'm also currently in pre-production. I kind of want to start my own little YouTube thingy, but I just got to figure out like what the heck I'm gonna do. So, yeah, stay tuned.
If only you knew someone who had a successful YouTube channel of their own to give you advice.
Yeah, where can I find that?
Where could we find someone?
Yeah. All right. Jacoby, J-Link, whatever your name is today.
Whatever my name is today.
Who are you?
Gender issues.
Why should we care about you?
Guy that can ban everybody.
Tara in the chat says Teddy Bear, who is above Ilya. Ilya is not on here.
No, that's...
She means in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, she's smart. Yeah. I even forgot about that. Yeah, Teddy Bear is above because Tevi is the Mario Kart World Champion.
Oh yeah.
Baby, let's go.
Yeah.
All right,
Jacob.
Okay. So basically, whatever name I am, I'm usually J-Link or Jacob or Jacoby on Discord. That's where you'll find me. I'm also the guy that can ban you on YouTube and Discord. So. I'm just mostly on Discord, just hanging around with this weird dude named Jesse that I've been friends with for about OG guys, and streaming Breath of the Wild. So yeah, I'm just an admin, just doing admin stuff and dinking around with him in Spork Knife and whatever else we do, like Four Swords Adventures whenever we get a chance. So. Yeah, I'm just usually on Discord. I do have a Twitter and Facebook, but I don't think they're relevant. So, but yeah, you can find me on Discord.
Cheetah.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm also in. I am not that active because you haven't noticed I'm actually quiet.
Oh my gosh, you're cutting out so bad.
No, I don't even have anything open.
I'll try one more time.
What am I?
All right. But a little bit better.
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm also in the Discord, but haven't been quiet, so I'm not as active there. But I can be. I'm also on Twitch, Chidapa, same, and I was in, and I'm looking to start that again as I get my life. So probably this upcoming summer at Chidapa Game.
To fill you guys in, she's saying that she wants to this summer.
You cut out two tubes.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I didn't even know what you said. It's that time of night.
This summer. Yes.
I can type it in the chat, and that way you guys know you.
They want to start a YouTube channel this summer, right? Is that it?
Yeah.
I mean, I have my channel. I just started summer.
Yeah,
Cool.
Chidapa.
Right.
CHEDAPPA.
I love PP. Tubes. Who are you? Why are you here?
I don't know who I am sometimes. But
Even I say that every time.
I am Chuplima. You can find me on the podcast sometimes when I'm not dying from my crazy schedule with Nintendo and my full-time job. Also, you can find me on Twitch at Chublima. It has 2 A's because I'm screaming in my name, apparently. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter, and that's pretty much all I use. But yeah, feel free to come give me a follow and come bug me in the Jesse's Discord if you feel like it.
She works for Nintendo, by the way.
She does work for Nintendo.
I do work for Nintendo.
Don't ask for favors. I've asked her for favors and she just gives me a
you
stiff finger. That's all she gives me.
Yeah, I can't.
They're sending her Smash Bros. And Pokemon and everything early, and I'm jealous.
Kayla told me that the next Smash Bros. Character is going to be Goku.
Yeah.
With a Vegeta Echo Fighter.
It's gonna be Banjo-Kazooie.
It's going to be Banjo-Kazooie.
Because they tell me these things.
Yeah. No, it's Eggman. It's Eggman, I'm telling you. Eggman.
Nah, fam. Goku.
Right.
Yeah, it's the anime characters.
I am Jesse, or Game Over Jesse, and I'm just here to clear up lies and clickbait and miscommunication that you find on 90% of other channels.
And also teach you fun Zelda fiat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shots
yeah.
fired.
Oh yeah.
Alright, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Later.